This is Kathy Lang. It's January the 17th, 2003. We're in Waynesville, Ohio, to interview Mr. Lyle Fox. Lyle?
Well, I was born near Lebanon, Ohio, where the airport is. I graduated from Waynesville High School in 1942 and started to Ohio State University. I kind of had a uneasy entrance into the service. I tried to enlist in the Air Corps Cadets in December '42 when I was home on break, and they turned me down and said I had a heart murmur and would never have to worry about the service. February '43, I was drafted. My heart healed, I guess. So I was sent to California Camp Roberts in the artillery for basic training. While there, they tested several hundred of us and sent us to college. I went to college, Pomona College in Claremont, California, to study engineering. That was one mistake the Army made. I was not a great math science student, so I transferred to the Army Air Corps, wanting to be a navigator. Spending time in Amarillo, Texas, and then Albuquerque, New Mexico. I was sent to college again in Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa. And there, the Army was running short of ground soldiers, I guess, because they eliminated anybody who had prior ground service, Army ground service. So a bunch of us were eliminated from the Air Corps and sent to the infantry. Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. We trained there and went to California and took amphibious training with the Navy and the Marines. They were priming us for beach invasions in the South Pacific. It so happened that the Battle of the Bulge came on in Europe, and we had all of our equipment packed for the Pacific, had suntan or khaki clothing for the South Pacific, and they wiped all of that out and shipped the whole division across the country from California to New Jersey and then to Europe, so the Army could move fast when they wanted to. We went into combat late in World War II in Germany and ended up in Czechoslovakia, which is now the Czech Republic. We were only in combat about 6 weeks, which was plenty long enough. One sidelight on that, Czech, 95 of us went back to the Czech Republic, as it's now called, on the 50th anniversary of VE Day. That was one of the greatest trips my wife and I have ever taken. There were 2 busloads of us toured, and the Czech people could not do enough for us. You couldn't buy anything. It was given to you. They treated us like royalty. So we came home from that with a much happier opinion than we had when we left there in '46. Then I finished college and started teaching in Germantown, Ohio. When we came out of the Army in 1946, they were trying to get anybody who had prior service to enlist in the reserves, Army Reserves. And you could enlist in any branch that you'd had any time in. I knew I didn't want to go back in the infantry. If I had to go back, I didn't want to be in the infantry. So I signed up in the Air Corps Reserve, or the Air Force Reserve at that time. And as luck would have it, I probably wouldn't have gone in the infantry, but I was recalled when I was the second year of teaching into the Air Force, stationed at Wright-Patterson for a while, teaching, and then I transferred again into a flying status to fly in jet intercept planes, to be a radar observer, a 2-man plane. Physically, I couldn't handle that, so I forced myself out, and they sent me then into Ground Observer Corps, as they called it, which was spot had observer posts all over the country, and they were supposed to observe airplanes and report them, just how many and where they were going and so forth. So that is pretty much a military career.
And that stage was during Korea,
That was
correct?
yes, I went back, recalled, and the reserves were recalled in April of 1951, and I was in that until June of 1953. My wife was home getting ready to have our second child, and I came up on a shipment to Nuremberg, Germany. She didn't want to go to Germany, so I had the option of coming out, and so I did.
In Germany, the action that you were in Germany in those 6 weeks, can you name the towns or the engagements?
Yeah, we crossed the Rhine and Bonn, Germany, stored everything there, and I was in an infantry rifle company, and I was a scout for the rifle platoon. They're the people who go out ahead and see what's out there. We primarily were in the Ruhr pocket, the Ruhr Valley, which is a large industrial area, and we spent a lot of time. We got a lot of prisoners. As I said, we were only in a short time, but the Germans that we encountered were wanting to give up, surrender, and the division was credited, I believe, with over 200,000 prisoners just in that short time. They'd just come in wanting to give up, and we'd start them onto the rear, walking, knowing that they would end up in a PW camp. We Cologne, we marched on the Autobahn, Cologne and Dusseldorf, Germany, and we were marching on the Autobahn when we heard from the tankers accompanying us that President Roosevelt had died. We heard about it on Friday the 13th, which was rather, he had died, I think, the day before, but we didn't hear about it until then. So we were just mopped up in the Dusseldorf area. Then they put us on trucks and shipped us down to the Czechoslovakia, it was called, and it has since split into Czech Republic and Slovakia.
What was going on in Czechoslovakia that they wanted you down there?
The Germans were still fighting down there.
So they had taken over Czechoslovakia
Yeah,
early in the war.
Yes.
And as they got pushed out, were the Russians coming towards them from the other side?
Yes. The Marienbad is the city, I think that was a German name for the city in Czechoslovakia. They were trying to leave the city, and our MPs and so forth had to stop them and turn them back. They knew the Russians were coming, and they wanted to get out of the country and get away from them. And they told us when we were there in 1995 that the Germans were easier to get along with than the Russians had been. They were under Russian rule, I think, for 40-some years. And, well, it hadn't been too many years before we were over there in 95 that they had evacuated the country. But we were in on so many ceremonies the time we were there. I think 21 ceremonies, laying of wreaths and hearing speeches. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright was with us quite a bit, and she's a fine lady, funny. She always had a hat on. She said a hat will cover a lot.
Now, were you guys given credit for the liberation of Czechoslovakia? Is that why they were so happy to see you come back in '95?
Well, I think, no, we were just part of several divisions that were in there. One of the armored divisions was there, and the Big Red One had been in, the Big Red One was the division, but we just had to be there at the time for the 50th anniversary. I think that meant more to them. The interesting, our first combat was in Siegburg, Germany, across the Sieg, S-I-E-G river, in little flat bottom boats, had to paddle them across. And so when we went back in '95, we wanted to get together with people in Siegburg, and the mayor kept us waiting a while, and he made some wry comments that said, as I recall, he's only 5 years old, but he says, as I recall, you were late getting here the first time. And he held us up so we couldn't eat breakfast there when we met him in '95. He was still arrogant.
So when he said you were late getting there, he meant they had to wait a long time to get liberated? Is that what he was referring to?
No, these were Germans.
Oh, they were Germans.
Huh.
Now, what was, at that point when you were marching down the Autobahn, was Germany just a pile of rubble?
Well, there, you wouldn't see anything along it. It was like, it'd be like going down I-75, except it's a much bigger highway, very thick, so they could withstand bombing. And the main thing that we encountered at the end of the war would be tanks and trucks and jeeps along the side of the road. The big thing that the Germans had facing, they ran out of gasoline. They couldn't move them, so they just abandoned them. That's why they were so eager to surrender and give up. Really, we never faced any of the crack fighters. It was the Wehrmacht, the civilian army, they called it, older men and the young Hitler youth. We encountered them in one spot. It was rather interesting. They were firing their artillery weapons. They had it set zeroed in on a crossroad, and they could fire like crazy, but they couldn't change it, elevate it, or change the trajectory of it. So as soon as they were dealt with, we heard that the young men wanted to surrender, but they were governed by SS troopers, and they would not surrender.
Were they just boys?
Yes, 14, 15, 16-year-old.
Did you also, when you took all these prisoners, find Polish people, all sorts of prisoners that the Germans had picked up, that they forced to fight in their army?
No, I can't say we ran across that, but we did in Marienbad, in Czechoslovakia, where we did our last fighting. We liberated a slave labor camp, and they were French, Dutch, everything, and they just swarmed over, surrounded us, and swarmed around, hugging us, and kissing us, and so glad to get out. And then the army had to bring in and set up a portable, well, like shower. We had to get DDT to get, they were so full of lice. And of course we got that from them being around us. That was.
Were they in horrible condition, like skeletons?
Not like the concentration camps. You didn't see any fat ones, but they were all able to move and work, or they wouldn't have been there. But
Had they just been forced into that because they were Jewish, or just because they were taken over and they needed laborers?
I would say the latter. They needed laborers. We didn't know the differentiation of the Dutch or Belgians or whatever, Polish. They just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't know what kind of work they were doing, or if they had a camp there in that city, a labor camp rather than a concentration camp.
Did you see any of the concentration camps as you marched through?
No, not at that time. Although our division was given credit for liberating one. I can't, Flossenburg or something like that. That was the neighbor, but we did not see it.
So you started out in Germany after the Bulge, or was the Bulge still going on?
No, it was over. It
So
was
was
over.
it in the spring?
We were there in the spring.
So
See,
the winter
Bulge
was the
Christmas
bad
time.
part. Yeah, the winter months were so bad. And then in the spring, they were by then into Germany.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So you joined them at that point?
Yes, across the Rhine River. went on from there.
When you were a scout and you had to go out, were you going into the cities and looking around, or were you just kind of a few miles ahead of your group, or how did your job work?
Well, I don't know how other divisions handled it, but our scouts were only out 100, 200 yards ahead of you.
Now, if you saw something, were you able to communicate back through
Yes.
a radio, or did you just have to
We
run?
We didn't have radios, we just had to get the word back.
So you had to run back.
There were two of us usually went out, my good friend from Virginia, and we'd gone to scout school together. The Germans were tricky how they would deal with scouts. Sometimes they let them come on through and like they were hiding, and let the scouts get on through and not see anything, and then the main body of the company would, you know, run into artillery or whatever it was. Or they might shoot the scouts on sight. You never knew what to expect from them. Always expect the worst.
Did you think they were a formidable enemy? I mean, you said you didn't run into the crack troops. At that time, they were pretty well beaten down,
Yeah.
but
Yes.
surely when you were here training, people talked about this was supposedly the unstoppable army
Mhm.
in the early 40s.
But as I mentioned, I think all of our concentration had been on preparing for the South Pacific and making beach landing with Marine or Navy planes flying over, strafing the beach just to give us the feeling for that. Coming in on the little landing craft and hitting the beach and going ashore. And those were just exercises.
So your training didn't turn out to be too relevant.
No, not when the bulls came on. Otherwise, we would have gone to the Pacific.
How did the German people react to you at that time? They were pretty much beaten. I mean, the civilians, the children, the mothers, the old people that were in the towns. Did they just stay away?
No, I think they were happy to see us, knowing that it was going to end. If we went through any small town, they would bring out beer and wine and give you. And the infantry, we had our company, which is roughly 180 to 200 men. We had a Jeep and trailer with us, full of beer all the time. And so.
Did you feel like they were sincerely glad to see you, or did you feel like they were just trying to be nice because they didn't want to get?
Well, probably some of both. The kids seemed genuinely interested and glad to see us. The older people, you know, didn't know what we would do, and that was the thing.
But did you go in Czechoslovakia? Did you encounter the Russians? Or
No, they made sure. They stopped us. Patton was wanting to go on, and we were down at that time attached to him. They stopped him, and that's one of the places we went. Still, I can't think of the name of it. Where they stopped Patton's army from going on. He never got over that, I don't believe. But he could have ended things there in a better manner, we feel. And then when we came back to the States in June of '46, we were given 30-day leaves, R&R, I guess they call it. And then we were gathered again in North Carolina, and we were going to head for the West Coast for the invasion of Japan. And that's when they dropped the bombs, the A-bombs, and we figured we wouldn't be going. They took us on to the West Coast anyway, and we sailed from there. We were out on the ocean, heading for the invasion when they signed the peace treaty in Battleship Missouri. And we were supposed to stop in Hawaii. We did stop in Hawaii. Our general, our commander, was supposed to separate the troops. And remember, they had a point system, Joe.
Mm-hmm.
I think a point for each month, and then a decoration and so forth. He was to separate those, add enough points to get out, send them back home. But he disregarded his orders and took us all, the whole division, on to Japan. he got to come back right away and appear before Congress and tell why
Yeah.
he had done that. We went on, it took roughly 6 months to get back. We were among the first occupation troops, landing there in October of '46
Landing in Japan?
in Japan.
And this was after the bomb. And what was it
This
like?
was after the peace treaty.
And was it like a moon crater?
No, we weren't allowed to move around much, so we didn't see much. Again, those people were very gracious, happy to see us, I think, because they'd suffered. We were north of Tokyo, several different camps in little air bases or naval air bases. So we just were there to see that everything went according to General MacArthur's wishes.
So at that point, you were under General MacArthur.
Yes.
And then Germany, you were under General Patton.
Well, we were, as I said, we were kind of a orphan outfit. We were assigned to 2 or 3 different armies, depending where they needed you that day. 3rd Army and the 9th Army. Patton grew. So we were just there to fill in.
How did you feel about your leadership, Lyle?
I thought we had good leaders for the most part.
Did you think you were well treated by the Army?
Yes, the infantry, I think, is you get very close bonding with, because you know you're going to have to depend on them if you get into combat. And, you watch their back and they watch your back. So I think we were, they talk about the Marines, Esprit de Corps, but we had it to a lesser extent, I think, but we were pretty well bonded. And we have a small group, we still have, we started again in '89 having small reunions. And they're coming to Waynesville this year again, Joe.
Oh, great.
There won't be 15 or 20 of us, but they've been here 3 times and they like Waynesville. So they'll be coming here in May.
What do they call your group? I mean, what's the number?
We were in the Company B, 303rd Infantry Regiment, which was part of the 97th Infantry Division. That was it.
All these numbers, it's hard to keep it straight.
Company, regiment, and division.
How was it for you, a young man, just graduated from high school in a little town in Ohio, and all of a sudden you're in another world?
Yeah, I was shocked when I'd only been in a week or so when they shipped me to California. I had been out of Ohio, but I hadn't been far out of Ohio. And that was a whole new world, because they were observing blackouts there on the coast in California, no lights on at night. But we were all young, we were all in the same boat, so we got along pretty well.
It was pretty scary. I mean, at that point, at 1943, anything could have happened. I mean,
Yeah.
no one knew what the outcome was going
No.
to be, and it must have been scary.
Well, I assume I was, particularly when I got on the ocean going to Europe, and the submarines were having fun out there with shipping. But we may have been too ignorant to be scared.
Too young.
Too young, yeah. It's just another adventure for us.
So you weren't worried about losing the war and having Germans come over here and run this country, or
Not
Japanese?
Not really.
To you, it didn't seem...
We just felt we were going to win.
There's no other way.
Yeah.
Where were you discharged?
Camp Atterbury, Indiana, first time.
Yes. And this is what year? What?
February 1946.
Okay.
What was your rank at that time?
I was a corporal.
And then in the end, were you still a corporal after you went back again?
No, I ended up first lieutenant because I had to be an officer to go into that flying program. And, my nerves couldn't handle proximity to planes coming at you, I guess.
After you were married at this time?
Second time, yes.
Okay, second time. Okay. And you were teaching?
Yes.
And where were you teaching?
Germantown, Ohio.
Very good. You taught there for
Well, I was in my second year, near the end of my second year when I was recalled.
Did you go back to school when all was said and done, or did you go back to teaching?
Between wars, I went back to, got my degree from Ohio State in 46.
GI Bill?
Yes, yes. I probably would have gone with help from the family, but that certainly made it easier.
So that was one good thing that came out
Yes,
of that?
yes. It was well worth the time I spent.
What do you,
Okay, how long were you teaching? You taught, is this your life profession?
Yeah, I taught 2 years, and then I was recalled in the service. I was in 26 months, and I came back and taught 1 year. And I had rather an unfortunate year, and I thought I had enough teaching, so I went downtown Gem City Savings. You remember, probably remember that.
Sure.
I worked there in the accounting department for 5 years. Like engineering, accounting was not my cup of tea, so I went back to teaching and retired. And this is starting my 23rd year of retirement.
Oh, boy. And Germantown all the
No,
time?
West Carroll.
West Carroll.
When I went back.
Okay.
West Carroll.
And you married Ellen, and then how many children?
We have 2 children, a son, daughter who lives in Beaver Creek, two grandchildren, 2 grandsons, and a son lives in Sacramento, California. He's married, but they have no children.
were you in Czechoslovakia when VE Day
Yes.
was the celebration?
Well, yes, we were happy that we wouldn't be getting shot at anymore. One of our men was celebrating and shot himself. Not seriously. I guess he couldn't handle his beer.
So you hauled around all that beer in your little trailer, so you guys were set up when VE Day came, huh?
Must have been.
The Army probably wouldn't hire us, probably wouldn't be pleased with that, but we had it. We liberated it. That was it, you know, we liberated the beer.
Did you have a lot of casualties in your group?
Well, for the time we spent there, we had, yes, I can't recall figures, but several deaths and many injuries. Some of the men were not injured, just come back to the company. And some of those who come to our reunions every year were those who were wounded. So they weren't too seriously wounded.
Were they wounded from enemy fire?
Yes, shrapnel, mostly.
So they were shooting artillery and stuff at you?
But I think they must have been running low on ammunition. We fared pretty well. The time was good. We were just like it's like a ball game when they put in the reserves to mop up. That's what we were doing.
Did you see some of the troops that had been there that weren't mopping up, the ones that had gone through first? Did you see those guys coming out?
Not-
Were you taking their place?
Not really, because we went in and they went out another way than what we went in or something like that. We just kind of picked up the pace. And, wherever they felt there was something that needed to be taken care of, our company was sent there.
Well, they were probably glad to see you anyway.
Oh, yes, I'm sure the ones that have been there a long time.
Get out of that hot seat. So overall, what would you say about your time in service?
It was well spent. Met a lot of wonderful men and had some good times together. And it settled us down so we came out of there ready to go to work or go to college or whatever. Whatever need be, so that my time was, I hate being away from home, but it was certainly not misery for me.
It matured most of us.
Oh,
didn't it?
yeah, definitely, yes. Particularly somebody like me from a small town here in Ohio.
Right.
Well, we thank you for your service to our country.
Well, thank you very much. did a lot of rambling there.
No, you did a great